Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where I discuss true crime cases involving military members and veterans, all with one goal in mind, to remind us to remain vigilant always. Now listen up. I usually cover one true crime case per episode, but today I'm bringing you my monthly headline episode, where I summarize some of the current military crime headlines of the month just to keep you all in the know. Today's headline segment was going to be way too long because too many things have been going on. So I cut out a few cases, but I think I might actually drop a mini headlines episode just to get us all caught up. A few of the cases that I cut today, but I will bring to you later, involved military men busted while attempting to meet up with underage kids for sex. One in full military uniform, which is disgusting. The worst part is that they are caught on camera and they always have that stupid look of defeat on their face. But bruh, what did you think would happen? Another case that I cut, but I'll cover later, involved a retired full bird colonel who is no kidding serving a few years in prison for sharing classified information with a woman that he met online purely to impress her. And another case that I'm going to tell you about later involves an acquittal case out of Fort Hood. In any event, make sure that you click follow wherever you're listening so you are immediately notified when a new episode drops. With that, today I do not have any Fort Hood cases for once, which is a surprise. But I do have 6 cases for you. I have a Navy fugitive case, a Fort Bragg Valentine's Day murder story, an update on the Gorge Amphitheater shooting case, Fort Rucker and Fort Leonard Wood case updates, as well as a double murder cold case out of Illinois, and finally, an update on the National Guard Washington, D.C. ambush. I have a lot to cover today, so let's get into it. Join me today as I bring you headlines involving military members and veterans. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
On February 2nd, 2026, the Norfolk, Virginia Police Department received a missing persons report for 39-year-old Lena Echevarria. Her brother reported that the family was concerned since they had not heard from Lena in nearly 2 weeks. Lena was married to a man named David Varela, a Navy reservist, and he kept telling Lena's family that Lena was in jail on a shoplifting charge. But things just weren't adding up for the family. Additional information was taken, and 3 days later, after failed attempts of reaching Lena and her husband, the police department executed a search warrant on the couple's downtown Norfolk apartment. And it was there, inside that apartment, where they made a grim discovery. Now, if you're expecting that they walked in and found Lena dead somewhere in the house, you'd be wrong. Authorities initially did a walkthrough of the house and they found no one, but they did find Lena's cell phone in the home as well as David's Tesla parked outside. But as they continued searching, all of a sudden they started opening appliances. And that's when they opened the kitchen freezer. And right inside the kitchen freezer is where they found Lena's body. Not surprisingly, the Emmy ruled Lena's death a homicide, but they have not released her cause of death as the investigation is still ongoing. But not only that, since finding Lena's body, guess who has been conveniently MIA? You guessed it, Lena's husband, David. Not only is David ignoring authorities, but he's also ignoring his Navy supervisors, which is completely out of character for him. At this point, local law enforcement got the FBI involved, and the FBI determined that David wasn't answering because he had long fled the country. Yup, on the same day that the search warrant was being executed at the couple's house, David was just chilling on an international flight to Hong Kong. Not only that, but they tracked his phone using the emergency disclosure request tied to his WhatsApp account, and the location data showed as Hong Kong. Investigators looked into David's connection to Hong Kong and they found none. His family is in Colombia. So when they looked further into the reasoning behind escaping to Hong Kong, it became clear that David was trying to avoid extradition. But wait, doesn't the US and Hong Kong have an extradition treaty? Well, it turns out that back in 2020, the extradition treaty was suspended amid tensions between the countries, which tends to add a layer of complexity to this ongoing case. Nonetheless, Interpol issued an international red notice looking for David Varela, who is 38 years old. Since Lena's discovery, David has been charged with first-degree murder and concealing a body to prevent detection. And those are two of the most serious charges on the books. Local prosecutors, including Norfolk Commonwealth's attorney Ramin Fahedi, confirmed that extradition efforts are underway. But honestly, the first thing anyone needs to do is find him first. Then they can worry about extradition later. So listen, everybody, please share this story. Maybe David is communicating with someone here in the United States. Maybe an old pal in the military. Someone clearly knows something. So if that's you, please reach out to authorities. Just after 7:45 a.m. on Valentine's Day 2026, deputies from the Moore County Sheriff's Office responded to a report of shots fired at a residence in the Wood Lake community of Voss. When officers entered the residence, they found two bodies, a man and a woman, dead from gunshot wounds. Now, I know you might be thinking, okay, maybe this is a murder-suicide, but this wasn't that. The victims were identified as 28-year-old Matthew Wade and 21-year-old Kateryna Tovmash. She went by Kate. Wade was a soldier stationed at nearby Fort Bragg, and Kate was his girlfriend, a Ukrainian refugee who had fled the war and settled down in North Carolina with her family. Kate often cared for her younger siblings, and that's what her and Wade were doing when they were attacked. Initial reports indicate that while Wade and Kate were babysitting at her mother's house, someone arrived at the front door, and somehow that person, whoever it was, convinced a 6-year-old boy who was Kate's brother to open the front door. The intruder entered the home and opened fire, killing Wade and Kate. Miraculously, the children present in the house were unharmed, even as they witnessed unimaginable violence. The suspect in the Valentine's Day double homicide was quickly identified as 25-year-old Caleb Hayden Fosnall, Kate's ex-boyfriend. Authorities believe he traveled all the way from Ohio to North Carolina to confront Kate. Now, I do want to mention that some reports I read say that her nickname is Kate and others say that her nickname is Katya. So listen, you're probably wondering, did they catch the guy? Well, just within 8 hours of the murders, he was swiftly arrested and extradited to North Carolina to face charges. He has been charged with 2 counts of murder and felony breaking and entering. Now, I did try to find out if the ex-boyfriend was somehow prior military, but I haven't found anything yet, and I will keep you posted if I hear anything else about this case. Our next case occurred a few years back on June 17th, 2023, when thousands of people gathered at the Gorge Amphitheater in Grant County, Washington. So, at this event, there were a ton of people who were gathered for the multi-day electronic dance music festival called Beyond Wonderland. It's an event known for its high-energy crowds, camping, and celebration of music. At around 8:20 p.m. in the sprawling campground area, a short distance from the concert grounds, a disturbing series of shots rang out among the tents and RVs. Witnesses initially thought that the sounds were part of the music or maybe it was some sort of fireworks, until it became terrifyingly clear that they were not. People began to run, they began to seek shelter, and alert one another that there was an active shooter on the grounds, The shooter was later identified by authorities as Specialist James M. Kelly, a 26-year-old active-duty soldier stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Western Washington. Kelly was assigned as a Joint Fire Support Specialist with the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment. According to law enforcement, the suspect began firing a handgun into a crowd of campers, striking people seemingly at random. Within minutes, 2 festival goers were struck fatally and several others were critically injured. The first 2 victims to fall were Brandy Escamilla, 29, and Jocelyn Ruiz, 26, both from Seattle, Washington. Escamilla and Ruiz were engaged to be married, and their deaths devastated family and friends who described them as adventurous, generous, and deeply in love. 3 more people were wounded in the shooting, including a 20-year-old woman identified as the shooter's girlfriend. She suffered 2 gunshot wounds to her lower body. Another victim was 31-year-old Andrew Quadra of Eugene, Oregon, and 61-year-old Lori Williams, a crowd management services employee whose glasses were shattered by a bullet as she responded toward the gunfire. All of those 3 victims I just mentioned did survive, though their injuries ranged from moderate to very serious. As deputies and first responders converged on the scene, Kelly was located in a field near the campground. During the confrontation, a Moses Lake Police Department detective shot Kelly, wounding him. He was transported to a local hospital for treatment before being booked into the Grant County Jail. In the aftermath of the shooting, Kelly was charged in Grant County Superior Court with multiple counts connected to the attack. 2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of first-degree assault, and one of those assault counts included a domestic violence enhancement due to the involvement of his very own girlfriend. In July of 2023, Kelly entered a not guilty plea to all charges, and he was held without bond. So for nearly 2 years, the state prosecution prepared for trial. While defense and prosecutors alike, they worked through procedural hearings, motions, and the ongoing challenge of reviewing extensive evidence from the chaotic scene. But then something happened. In early 2026, nearly 3 years after the shooting, the case took a major legal turn that will define how Kelly is ultimately prosecuted. And that's why I'm covering this in today's Headlines episode. Grant County prosecutors formally granted jurisdiction of the case to the U.S. military justice system, meaning that the Army, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, aka the UCMJ, will now take primary responsibility for prosecuting Kelly's alleged crimes. Now, this transfer of jurisdiction is significant on multiple levels. And when I say that it absolutely shocked me, I mean, I am shook. It's not every day that you see a major case being transferred to the military for them to prosecute, even when it involves military members. But the decision in this case to send the case into the military system was described by the Grant County prosecuting attorney as a way to ensure expansive investigatory reach, access to military witnesses and personnel, and the full weight of a justice system that can manage multi-jurisdictional elements of the case, including testimony from military service members scattered across the country. At the time of this update, Kelly's case is being prepared within the military legal framework, and he continues to be held without bond or without bail. He's probably just in pretrial confinement right now. Charges are expected to mirror the state accusations with murder and assault counts, but will now be adjudicated through a court-martial rather than a traditional civilian jury trial. What remains unclear is why Kelly opened fire that night. Initial court filings and media reports from the time of his arrest suggested that maybe Kelly was under the influence of psychedelic mushrooms and experiencing hallucinations, which possibly led to a very bad trip during which he believed the world was ending. Now, these claims appeared in court documents in mid-2023. However, those mental state claims have not been fully litigated in open court, and motives beyond the devastating harm caused remain subject to interpretation as it goes to court-martial, which I am fascinated to hear the results of. Our next headline case takes us to Cicero, Illinois, circa 1995. On April 12, 1995, 2 young brothers, 22-year-old John Fields and 19-year-old Michael Fields, were gunned down on a street in Cicero, Illinois. In addition to being brothers by blood, these brothers served together as United States Marines. So, when they were both found dead together along 50th Court, each suffering multiple gunshot wounds, it stunned the community. But sadly, for whatever reason, this case went cold for over a decade. But then, in 2013, as the cold case team revisited the files, they were able to track down a local witness that they hadn't been able to, kind of like pin down. This witness led investigators to a suspect by the name of Daniel Flores. Daniel and the brothers knew each other from the neighborhood, and they had previous run-ins, but eventually a confrontation turned deadly. Okay, so if they had Daniel's name back in 2013, what gives? I mean, why are we talking about this now in 2026? Well, here's the kicker. Investigators said that Flores fled the country shortly after the killings and was chilling and living his best life in Mexico. But by March of 2016, police had obtained an arrest warrant for Flores, but he was not located and arrested until 2023. His takedown went down in the city of Celaya in Mexico, and after a lengthy 2-year process, Daniel was extradited back to the United States. And that's when, in February of 2026, Daniel Flores entered a guilty plea in Cook County Court, He pled guilty to 2 amended counts of second-degree murder in the deaths of John and Michael Fields. After his plea was accepted, Flores received 2 8-year prison terms ordered to be served consecutively. That's right, 16 years total for 2 murders. And that number may feel jarring to a lot of my listeners. But in cases like this, plea deals can reflect a lot of legal realities. For example, the age of the case, the state of surviving evidence, witness availability, litigation risk, and what prosecutors believe they can still prove beyond a reasonable doubt decades later. So that's where we are with that case, and he will be serving just 16 years. My next story is out of Washington, D.C., and it's a case that stunned the nation right before Thanksgiving 2025. On November 26, 2025, the day before Thanksgiving, 2 members of the West Virginia National Guard were ambushed in downtown Washington, D.C., which is just blocks from the White House, and they were carrying out their assigned duties. One guardsman, 20-year-old Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, would lose her life from her wounds the next day. The other, 24-year-old Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, was critically injured and is now slowly recovering months later in rehab. So what the heck happened that day? It was about 2:15 p.m. that Wednesday when the pair were standing guard near the Farragut West Metro Station. They were there as part of a mission that had placed National Guard troops in the Capitol under the banner of a crime-fighting task force. Well, as they were standing guard, without warning, a man approached and opened fire, unleashing what law enforcement described as an ambush-style attack on the 2 guardsmen. In just seconds, the quiet afternoon turned into a scene of violence and chaos. According to the criminal complaint filed in court, the attacker, later identified as 29-year-old Ramanullah Lakhanwal, first shot Beckstrom in the back of the head before attempting to reload and firing at Wolf, striking him in the head as well. Shockingly, the shooter was captured on surveillance footage, which showed the perpetrator advancing toward the guardsman with his weapon drawn, firing without any apparent provocation. A nearby National Guard member returned fire, and law enforcement officers and a bystander helped subdue and take the perpetrator into custody. Beckstrom and Wolf were rushed by Air Medical Services to MedStar Washington Hospital Center, where Beckstrom's condition was described as critical. The following day, on November 27th, Beckstrom passed away, leaving behind grieving family, friends, and a Guard community devastated by her loss. Wolf, who had also been shot in the head, miraculously survived and began a long recovery process, gaining strength, responding to commands, and making gradual progress in rehabilitation through early 2026. So who was Sarah Beckstrom? Specialist Sarah Beckstrom was a young soldier from Somerville, West Virginia, who had enlisted in the National Guard in June of 2023, and she had been deployed to Washington as part of her unit's assignment to assist with patrols in the Capitol since August of 2025. Beckstrom was remembered by those who knew her as dedicated, kind-hearted, and committed to both her military duty and her civilian goals. Her funeral at the West Virginia National Cemetery was attended by fellow guardsmen, local leaders, and community members who honored her service with military rituals and a procession that reflected the deep impact of her loss. So who is Andrew Wolf? Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf from Martinsburg, West Virginia, enlisted in 2019, shortly after graduating high school. At 24 years old, he had already built years of service and responsibility as a guardsman. After the shooting, Wolf's family and unit shared updates on his condition. Though his injuries were severe, he showed incremental improvements, moving more, responding to loved ones, and continuing the difficult path of rehabilitation. Many describe these moments as small miracles, milestones in his ongoing recovery. So let me turn now to the suspect. The man charged in the attack is Ramanullah Lakhanwal. He's an Afghan national who came to the United States under the Operation Allies Welcome Program, a humanitarian resettlement initiative. He lived in Bellingham, Washington, with his wife and 5 children and had been granted asylum earlier in 2025. According to investigators, Lakhanwal traveled across the country from Washington State to Washington, D.C., armed with a .357 Magnum revolver, and that's when he ambushed Beckstrom and Wolf on that November afternoon. Now, I have so many more questions, and I'm sure we're going to have answers to those eventually. Now, Lackenwall was wounded at the scene and taken into custody. In December of 2025, he pled not guilty in D.C. Superior Court to charges including first-degree murder, assault with intent to kill, and illegal possession of a firearm. The court has ordered him held without bond as the case moves forward, and prosecutors have discussed the possibility of pursuing the death penalty if the legal standards for such a sentence can be met under federal law. Now, as early as 2026, the case remains before the court with further hearings scheduled, and the government continues to build its prosecution while balancing complex questions of motive, mental health evaluations, and the nexus of immigration status and violent crime. The attack immediately drew national attention, as you can imagine, not only for the location of the attack, which was so close to the White House, but for the fact that the two military service members had been targeted while performing duties on U.S. soil. In December of 2025, Congress passed a bipartisan resolution honoring Beckstrom and Wolf, recognizing their sacrifice and service to the nation. Members of both the House and Senate spoke on the floor, noting the courage it takes to serve and the tragedy of seeing such young lives cut short or permanently altered by violence. Now, this next thing that I'm going to say is the reason why I chose to cover this case in this month's headline episode. In early 2026, Secretary of War Hegseth announced that both Beckstrom and Wolf would be awarded the Purple Heart, which is the military honor bestowed on those wounded or killed by enemy action. The acknowledgement was a formal recognition of their sacrifice, an honor that underscores the fact that even on American soil, guardsmen and service members can face deadly risk in the line of duty.
Instagram teen accounts have automatic protections for what teens see and who can contact them, plus time management tools. And Instagram will continue adding built-in safety features to help create age-appropriate experiences. Learn more about teen accounts and Instagram's ongoing work to protect teens online at instagram.com/teenaccounts.
This headline takes us to Fort Rucker to close out a case I previously covered when it first broke. In the quiet hours of January 10th, 2023, at Fort Rucker, Alabama, two young soldiers, both assigned to the Advanced Individual Training Course for Air Traffic Control Operators at the Army Aviation Center of Excellence, became embroiled in an altercation that ended with one of them dead and a long, painful path toward justice that would stretch over 3 years. On that January morning in 2023, Private Abdul Latifu and another trainee, Private Brian Jones Jr., were both in the barracks of the 1st Battalion, 13th Aviation Regiment, part of the 1st Aviation Brigade, when a disagreement between them suddenly escalated. According to reporting from military and local news sources, Jones attacked Latifu with an Army-issued entrenching tool, which is a collapsible steel shovel commonly carried by soldiers as standard equipment. The incident occurred just before 11:40 a.m. right outside the soldiers' rooms in the barracks. During that altercation, Latifu sustained fatal injuries, which took his life. Fort Rucker officials swiftly launched an investigation into the death. Military police detained Jones at the scene shortly after the killing and turned the case over to Army CID. In the immediate aftermath, commanders at the Aviation Center of Excellence issued statements offering condolences to Latifu's family and ensuring support services for the unit affected by the tragedy. In the days that followed, military leadership moved quickly to press formal charges. By January 19, 2023, Jones had been charged with murder by Army officials under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He was ordered held in pretrial confinement awaiting court-martial. So real quickly, who was the victim? Private Abdul Latifu was just 21 years old at the time of his death. He was originally from the Bronx, New York. Latifu was described by Army leaders and friends as a promising, dedicated young soldier who was building a life and career in the military. So the case against Jones finally reached a conclusion in January of 2026. On January 29, 2026, Private Brian Jones Jr., by then 24 years old, pled guilty at a court-martial to one count of unpremeditated murder in the killing of Private Latifu. Under the UCMJ, an unpremeditated murder plea reflects an acknowledgement of responsibility without the additional element of planning or intent, which is akin to what many states would categorize as second-degree murder. After accepting his plea, the judge sentenced Jones to 247 months of confinement, which amounts to roughly 20 years and 7 months in prison. He was also sentenced to a reduction to the rank of E1, total forfeitures of pay and allowances, and a dishonorable discharge. My next and final case today is out of Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and it is one of those that shook an entire installation because of where the victim was found. 23-year-old Sergeant Sarah Roque was a mine detection dog handler stationed at Fort Leonard Wood, and she was just living her life. She was the type of soldier who handled business, was always on time, always did her job, and never had any issues. So, on October 21st, 2024, when she failed to show up for morning formation, alarms immediately went off. A search started, and later that same day, the search ended in the worst possible way. That evening, Sarah's body was found inside a garbage bag placed in a dumpster behind the barracks where she lived. Investigators said she had been shot in the head, and the top of the bag was closed with a zip tie. I remember hearing about Sarah's case when it first happened, and how she was discovered truly hurt my soul. Well, within days of Sarah's discovery, authorities arrested a fellow soldier by the name of Specialist Wooster Rancy, a combat engineer assigned to the 509th Engineer Company, 5th Engineer Battalion, 36th Engineer Brigade. But after his arrest, the public, we really didn't know what the connection was there. Were Rancy and Sarah friends? Were they just coworkers? Was this a romantic relationship gone sour? I mean, we knew nothing. And to be completely honest with you, we still know nothing. As the Army's criminal investigation, though, unfolded, prosecutors began to build a timeline that focused on where Sarah was last seen and who she was with. According to the Army's summary of the case, cell phone location data showed that Sarah and Rancy were together at Sarah's apartment for about an hour on October 20th, 2024, which was the day before she was reported missing. Additionally, authorities discovered that Rancy purchased heavy-duty trash bags and zip ties from a local Walmart on the morning of October 20th. Rancy also used electronics to search for the Fort Leonard Wood trash pickup schedule, and he also searched, quote, how long it takes for a garbage bag to end up in a landfill, end quote. Then came forensic details that prosecutors used to tie the shooting to physical evidence. Investigators found a bullet lodged in a banana inside Sarah's refrigerator. They also found a firearm located in Rancy's off-post apartment that was later confirmed through forensic testing to be connected to the banana bullet evidence. That was all according to reporting based on the Army's release. By July 2025, reporting noted that Rancy was facing murder and obstruction of justice charges. The court-martial began January 27, 2026, and was held off-post at the Pulaski County Courthouse in Waynesville, Missouri, just outside the installation, due to the fact that this case had so much public interest. There were several days of testimony, and then on February 4, 2026, a military panel found Specialist Wooster Rancy guilty of premeditated murder in Sarah's death. He was also convicted of obstruction of justice. Now, 2 days later, on February 6, 2026, the military judge sentenced Rancy to life in prison without the possibility of parole, reduction to E1, total forfeiture of pay and allowances, and a dishonorable discharge. Honestly, I have not found reporting describing any type of motive in the case, so my intent here is to request the full court-martial transcript and bring you this case later in more depth. But be warned, it will take a year for the transcript to even be finalized by the Army at least, and then it will take probably another 2 to 4 years for them to respond to my FOIA request. So maybe I can get to this case by 2030, maybe, if I'm still doing the podcast by then. We shall see. In any event, I am extremely thankful and grateful that there was justice for Sarah. True Crime Army, thank you so much for listening to these headline episodes. My next few non-headline cases are going to be really hard-hitting cases. And since you're listening today and you listened until the very end, I'm going to bring you in on my next few episodes. Remember the American Sniper case of Chris Kyle? Yes, after years of people begging me to cover that case, I am finally doing it. In addition to Chris Kyle's case and his friend Chad Littlefield, because Chris Kyle didn't die by himself, so it was a double murder. In addition to the double murder, I will be bringing you a cold case that was recently solved where the perpetrator said these words, quote, "I'm a serial killer that only killed once," end quote. What in the world? Listen, y'all, my research has been off the walls because these cases are just so intense. Anyway, True Crime Army, if you want to support the show, just keep listening. That's the #1 way to continue to support the show. But if you want to support the show in other ways as well, make sure you visit patreon.com/militarymurder to see all the ways that you can support while listening ad-free and even unlocking over 60 full-length bonus episodes. My sources for today's headlines episode include reporting by military.com, Stars and Stripes, Army.mil, Army Times, Fox News, Law and Crime, ABC 7 Chicago, ABC 11 Raleigh, KSL, WRAL News, Columbia Basin Herald, KPTV, CBS News, Chicago Sun-Times, WVVA, and 29 News. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The music was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next time.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.